hopefully people will join since we're Well, greetings and good morning, everyone. And it is a little earlier for us than usual, but today had some things to do, so we needed to get this in a little earlier than normal. It took just a few weeks for U.S.-backed rebel forces to sweep from northwest Syria and take control of its major cities in incredibly quick succession, forcing the fall of President Bashar al-Assad. Is this a temporary shift in the dynamic, or is Syria lost forever? And if so, what does this do to the wider geopolitical landscape? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode of this broadcast, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is the fall of Syria. My guest is an independent journalist whose work can be found at thepolemicist.net and Substack, and his latest piece is entitled Wild Turkey, Syria's Blindside. Dr. Jim Kavanaugh, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Wilmer. Always a pleasure.
So you open your piece as follows. The sudden jihad offensive in Syria is a disaster. It is, first of all, a disaster for the Syrian people. It's also a disaster for the Palestinian people, Hezbollah, Iran, and the entire axis of the anti-Zionist resistance. And it's a disaster for Russia and China and the project of replacing a unipolar American hegemony with multipolarity based upon a new BRICS-based global political economy. Great piece. Great opening paragraph. But that's not the dominant Western narrative. Kavanaugh.
Well, he overthrew the great dictator, the horrible, vicious dictator of Syria, just like we overthrew the vicious dictator of Iraq, and just like we overthrew the vicious dictator of Libya. Look what happened to those countries. If you haven't learned this lesson yet, these guys were authoritarian rulers. They were very nasty and brutal in many ways. There are a lot of people in prisons that shouldn't be in prison. All of that I just saw yesterday, last night before I went to bed, a guy from Baghdad. I was one of the people who tore down Saddam's statue. I was so happy when the Americans came in. I'd put it back up now if I could. I've seen guys from Libya saying the same thing. A guy from Libya saying, Syrians, do not fall for the same thing that we fell for. This is the game the Americans play, nasty. I mean, a lot of people in prison in the United States that shouldn't be in prison. A lot of people in prison in the UK that shouldn't be in prison. It's going to be great to open the prisons. But, this is not what's being replaced with is in all those cases, well, especially in Libya and Syria, this group of jihadis, takfiri, they call them, sectarians, who were terrorists according to the United States. There's still a $10 million bounty on the head of this guy Jolani, who's the head of HTS, which is Al-Qaeda rebranded.
Mm-hmm.
And he's being treated with great respect by American media who are interviewing him while there's a $10 billion bounty on his head because he's a terrorist. So what you're going to have is chaos, and that's the object of it. The object of this in all three cases, you can see it. And they got what they wanted from it, which is chaos, which is destroying the coherence of the Iraqi, Libyan, and now Syrian state. There's not going to be a Syrian state as there were. There's going to be, this HTS group isn't going to be running. They're going to be running some part of it, and it's going to be, the Syrian state is going to be broken up. The point was to weaken fatally, to do away entirely with the military. Israel went right in, spent all day yesterday bombing every bit of military installation in Syria, the airport, bombing warehouses, destroying all of the anti-aircraft facilities and all of the airplanes. And they did that right away. So the Syrian military is gone. The point of these things was to destroy the states in the Arab world that were still part of an anti-Zionist resistance that supported the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian resistance movement with arms, with money, with diplomacy, and with political support. And they've done it. They've eliminated from the chessboard all the Arab states that were real parts of the anti-Zionist resistance. And, it's been a long slog in Syria. They started this in 2011, and they almost succeeded. And they said, John Kerry is on the phone saying, we know ISIS is going to come and take Damascus. We want them to do that. We'll take care of them afterwards. They think they can control everything, but they really can't. But the Russians came in 2015 after, and everybody has to understand this, in 2015, Obama announced that he was going to start attacking Syrian troops. He effectively announced a war against Syria. We're not just supporting these jihadi rebels anymore, these moderate rebels. We're now going to directly start attacking Syrian troops. It was after that Assad asked Russia to come in, and they came in and they interrupted the game that the Americans were playing there. But it was only interrupted, and the Americans never stopped it. They continued to occupy Syria. And Turkey came in and occupied part of Syria. And it was one of these zombie wars where, okay, we're going to put it to sleep for a while, but we're going to keep, it's going to be like a ceasefire, and we're going to keep arming people. And that's what happened. And they came back, and Turkey was the nastiest. The treachery of Turkey is unbelievable. And Turkey was an actor here, was acting in concert with, of course, the United States and Mossad, which were paying these people. But Turkey was arming them to the teeth, bringing in personnel, bringing in manpower from other countries all around the world, and using the Idlib readout, the government of Idlib, which they allowed. There was this deal again, Astana, which we'll let the jihadis have this, go there, and we'll have a ceasefire, and they can, we'll stop the fighting. But they use that just like they use Minsk to rearm and get ready for an attack, and that's what they did. And Turkey kind of came out of its corner. And delivered, I in my article, I love the great strategic thinker Mike Tyson. And everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. We've all been sitting around saying, "Oh, Israel is exhausting itself. Hezbollah is very strong. Hamas is still fighting. Iran is powerful. Russia is powerful. Blah blah blah." Guess what? Sucker punch. Turkey came out. We didn't see that coming. We got punched in the face. Turkey came out. It's another game now. It's another game entirely. Nothing is inevitable. There's still the fundamental problems. And again, they've created problem. Now they own this. They own this China shop. They created this situation that's going to be chaotic and going to be dangerous, but they think they can control it, and they can, because they can just bomb the crap out of everything now that comes up in Syria, because nobody cares about any of these jihadis. But it's not this, even this, the Syrian results is not without danger for the United States and Israel, but it's not the same danger that the unity of the axis of resistance with Syria and Iran and Hezbollah represented. And they'd much rather have it, and they've said that, the Israelis have said it time and again, we'd much rather have ISIS than Assad. The long-term fundamental problems of imperialism and Zionism are still there and still undermining it. But we have to realize nothing is inevitable. Crap happens and things come out of the blue. Players come in that you didn't expect to be there. You get punched with a hand that you didn't even see, which is the hand of Turkey at this point. And we have a long slog to go.
You mentioned Gaddafi and you mentioned Saddam Hussein, but then later on in your discussion, you mentioned Minsk. I see so many similarities here with Ukraine, in that Assad was democratically elected. Now, there are a whole nasty guy, but I remember interviewing Dan Kovalik from Syria. He was a election observer in Syria a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the Syrian election. He was talking about how orderly it was. He was talking about this is a free and fair election. And he left the country saying, I want to say that Assad had over 80% of the vote. That might be a little high, but my point being, the United States talking about, overthrowing this dictator. He had an election. He won the election. The United States went into Ukraine and overthrew a democratically elected president as well.
Yeah. And who doesn't have elections, who refuses to have elections. Yeah, this idea that this is anything about democracy. First of all, the United States has anything to teach anybody about democracy. 2016, the guy who lost by 3 million popular votes became the president. That's American democracy, right? 2020, this is a very fragile, let's put it that way, democracy. We know that it's controlled by the donors and the donor class. Most people, the party that the plurality party that I'm a member of, are people who don't vote because they know it's not going to change anything fundamental. And so we're not in any position to be preaching to anybody or going with our army to overthrow regimes because they're not democratic enough. And that's not why we're doing it. Syria, Iraq, Libya, the point wasn't to make them more democratic, and it didn't. It didn't make them more democratic or more secular or more liberal. It made them more chaotic. Mm-hmm. And that's the point of it, to weaken them and break them up and to make them more chaotic, because they cannot then be a pole of support for the Palestinian resistance. And they've been removed from the board as poles of serious support for the Palestinian resistance. And that's what this has been about. Now, the Ukraine thing, I bring that up because, as I said in the article, Erdogan played the equivalent of Poroshenko, who was the previous president of Ukraine during the Minsk agreement, and who said, we just use that to rebuild our army. And that's what Erdogan, Russia got into an agreement. Russia is conflict averse, tries to avoid conflicts. They got the Minsk agreement, which supposedly had certain terms, but was just used to rebuild the Ukrainian army by NATO as a NATO catch-all. And they got the Astana agreement, was supposed to separate the forces, and there were conditions, and except it was just used by Turkey and Israel and the United States to rebuild the jihadi forces for an attack, and forget about the conditions of it. So what I'm saying is that Erdogan was the analog of Poroshenko in Ukraine in terms of the Minsk agreement. The Minsk agreement was an agreement, the Astana agreement. It was an agreement like the Minsk agreement. And I think everybody's got to learn. You can't trust. You can't trust the United States, Israel. You can't trust the West in this regard. They'll break an agreement, and this is why and Ukrainians helped. Ukrainian sent from their conflict. They sent UAVs and they sent drones, UAVs, and they sent personnel to train these jihadis. They helped. So there's a direct connection here. And one of the main things I want to say, the point of my article is, these conflicts and these situations that people kind of like to keep separate in their minds. Oh, this is going on over here and this is going on over there. And Russia certainly likes to keep it separate. Well, we're fighting American hegemony here, but over here, we're not really anti-Zionist. So, we'll let the Israelis bomb Syria for the purpose of defending Zionism, but as long as they don't attack us directly. Well, what you have to learn here and what people have to learn is that, very important to me, Zionism has been completely integrated into the American imperialist project. The United States is as much a Zionist country as it is an imperial. For the United States, Zionism is an integral, indissociable part of its imperialist project. And you cannot be successfully fight imperialism without fighting Zionism. That's what we've got to learn. It's a powerful force, and it's very difficult. So these things cannot be separated and thought of. Oh, we can let this happen over here while we deal with this over here. It's one big war. It's one big unavoidable war, and it's going to get worse. As I said, we were talking before the show. I think what's happened in Syria is going to make a major conflict, a nuclear war, possibly more likely than it was the day before. Because
explain why.
Because the Americans and the Israelis are going to feel even more omnipotent and even more untouchable, and they will be for the moment at least. Mm-hmm. And because the other players, Iran now is its back to the wall. It's got it can't pretend that it's not existentially threatened. Israel has always, for years, I've written about it many times, for at least 15 years, trying to push the Americans into an attack on Iran. They think even more now that they can get away with it. And so the Iranians are going to have to decide. They're supposed to have been, we're going to really attack Israel for what they did to us. They haven't done it yet. Everybody is afraid of war for good reasons, but they're going to get chipped away. The Americans and Israelis are going to increase the military pressure on Iran, if not attack it. And I'm pretty sure they will just outright attack it at some point. And Iran is going to have to go all in. And Russia now, again, has to realize we can't trust them. We couldn't trust Minsk. We couldn't trust Astana. We can't trust anybody. We have to win this war in Ukraine on our terms, total victory. They have to do that. And the Americans are going to have to respond to that. And so we're in a situation now where everybody has their back to the wall, and the Americans and Israelis think they're the hottest things since sliced bread, and they can get away with anything, and they have a lot of power, and they can blow everything up. And so we're going to be, I think, we're in a more dangerous situation that's likely to lead to a major war in Iran, which the Israelis will use nuclear weapons. I guarantee it. They'll tell the Americans they won't, but they will. And then the Americans will do what? Say, we're going to leave the war because you didn't know. They're going to say, oh, shit, that's too bad. But everybody has a right to defend themselves. Israel has a right. And the Americans, and I don't believe, for anybody who believes, if Iran or Russia are sitting around saying, well, maybe Trump will come in and we'll be able to, he wants to.
That's my next question. Is there a difference? Well, that's my next question. Is there a difference, an anticipated difference with the incoming Trump regime, and did the Biden administration expedite its calendar? Are we seeing now in December what we were going to see in February, March, or April had Kamala Harris won the election?
Well,
hopefully that question made sense.
Yeah, no, the situation in Syria and the Middle East, again, I think Turkey was a major issue. Turkey acted in a way that I think was unexpected all around. It was prepared for. Turkey was not doing anything that the Israelis and Americans weren't involved in, but they didn't expect this kind of attack. And we have to say it, something was seriously wrong in Syria. The Syrian army melted away.
Right.
There's a lot of discussion about this. Russians in Syria talk about it. A lot of people talked about the Syrian army had been weakened for some reason by corruption or incompetence or complacency. But whereas they fought like hell from 2012 to 2019, when the Russians helped them, the Russians didn't put troops in there. And as Hezbollah helped them, and Hezbollah did put personnel in there. But, in this situation, the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah, I mean, we have our own, now they're involved in their own fights, and they're seeing the Syrian army can't fight. So they can't replace a disciplined and dedicated Syrian army, which there was, and there apparently was in 2012, 2019. There isn't now. So that was something went wrong in Syria. We have to deal with that. Syria had problems that led to its downfall more quickly than anybody expected, I think, including the Israelis and the Americans.
We've heard for years that ISIS is our enemy. We're fighting ISIS. You can walk through Central Park or walk through the Grand Canyon, and under every rock, we have to be sure that there aren't ISIS jihadist fighters behind every rock that we come across. But what it really appears to be, whether it's Syria, whether it's Mali, whether it's Niger, these rebel groups, these Islamist terrorist groups, they're changing their names, but they're basically the reincarnation of the same entity, funded, backed, trained by the United States.
Well, they were. Look, Timber Sycamore was a huge operation. And I, as I said, the first thing I wrote online was about Syria in 2012. And the cataract was the term they used in New York Times, cataract of weaponry that was being poured into Syria. And it was all being managed by the United States. The Syrian fighters all said, oh, we take our orders from Washington. So this was all, and again, this is part of the United States put its, and Seymour Hersh wrote about it in The Redirection, that the United States was going to ally with Sunni Salafist groups to against the other forces in the region, and their purpose was to instigate and accelerate sectarianism and chaos based on religious sectarianism, and they want that. And there's a plan from the 1980s, the Unknown Plan. Israel's had a plan, which was to surround itself with chaotic, sectarian, crazy Islamist states, so that it could present itself as the only reason, give themselves legitimacy as the only reasonable state in the region. And they worked on that, and they did it. They succeeded at these crazy, forever wars and irresponsible, ridiculous wars in the Middle East. They had a reason, and they succeeded. The Iraqi war was a success. The Libyan was a success. It wasn't a success from the point of view of the ostensible reason for, we're going to create democracy and a stable state, and the region is going to be more stable because of this. That wasn't the real reason. The reason was to create a chaotic sectarian state that would look so crazy that Israel would look like, oh, we got to support Israel. That's the reason for it. So, but I want to get back to that point about Ukraine and about. I think I see it in the talking of the people who support Ukraine or support Russia in Ukraine or support the Palestinian resistance. There's this, and it's sure part of the Democratic line in the United States too. Oh, Trump's going to come in, he's going to change everything.
Right.
Dream on. Trump put out a tweet yesterday about Syria, and it was. And I saw Alexander Mercouris, who's a great guy and he's very interesting. But he wants to find something in Trump that's going to be different. And it was like, and Trump put out a tweet saying, "Oh, we should never have gotten involved. We shouldn't be involved with Syria." And the Russians they don't want to be involved in Syria either. And this war in Ukraine, they don't want to be involved in Ukraine either. And it's really bad for them. They have lost 600,000 troops, and the Ukrainians have lost 400,000 troops. That's a crazy number. So let's delusional. It's completely delusional about that.
Right.
And it's been very bad and very terrible for them. But if I come in, it'll be even more terrible. And Mercouris interpret that as he doesn't want it to become more terrible. That's not what he was saying. What he was saying is if I come in and the Russians don't agree to a ceasefire, I'm going to make it more terrible for them.
Right.
So
right.
this is, Donald Trump himself has, an inch worth of thinking about any of these problems, but the people he's bringing himself with they're American. He's an American exceptionalist in a trivial way, in a superficial way, but the people he's surrounding himself to are American exceptionalists in a profound way. We're the biggest kids on the block. We can beat anybody. We're going to beat everybody. Watch that. We're going to intimidate everybody into doing it. This is the danger. They're not going to intimidate Russia. Russia took a hit here, but they're not going to be intimidated by the Americans in Ukraine. They're not. Certainly Trump is not going to be one bit less nasty for the Palestinians and one bit less obsequious to the Israelis than the Biden was. So what we're seeing here is the playing out of what under the Biden administration was accelerated and will be accelerated again under Trump. But Trump is not an anti-war, anti-imperialist candidate.
To that point, one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, is they believe that foreign policy is administration specific, that the Biden foreign policy is woefully different than the Trump foreign policy, which is woefully different than the Obama. It's the American security state that controls foreign policy. The rhetoric may change. There may be some adjustment on the periphery of the policy, but the fundamental policy elements of the United States empire are not controlled by the administration. They're controlled by the American security state.
Yeah, I think, we see that. It's not that presidents can't do things that are significantly different. We got to give credit to Obama for the JCPOA, for the Iran deal, right? But what you see, I'll use Obama and Trump together as examples. Obama instituted the JCPOA, but he couldn't hold it. Okay, because
wait a minute. But there are those who say he initiated the JCPOA, but never intended for that agreement to actually come to fruition and completion.
Well, but my point is, even if he personally did intend it,
okay,
the national security state and the Zionist lobby is going to come in and they upended it, right? And we see that Joe Biden made a point of that. Oh, look at what Obama did. Look at what Trump got us out of the JC. Obama was so well in doing that, and Trump he could have put us back in. He didn't want to do that. So again, the national security state and the Zionist agenda, in that specific case, very importantly, and they have pushed the United States. It's not impossible that an American president would resist the Zionists. Reagan did it, right. But it's been pushed forward in the last 30 years, and now in the last 10 years, it's impossible. And Biden did accelerate it to the point where I'm going to give Bibi anything he wants. He can slaughter the Palestinians in Gaza. I don't care. He can get anything, all the weapons to kill as many people as he wants. Trump wanted to pull out of Syria, and he couldn't really do it. Trump, I want to pull out of Syria. But guess what? He wasn't allowed to, in a certain sense. So you see exactly what you're saying. There are deep state forces in the national security state and the military apparatus that are going to push forward the agenda of American supremacy throughout the world, and American imperialism and American exceptionalism. And we cannot allow anybody to emerge as a peer competitor anywhere in any region of the world. And that's what they're doing. And certainly, in Ukraine, Russia is a bête noire. They have to try and keep Russia down. That's what they're doing with Ukraine. Ukraine is not a war to save Ukraine. Ukraine is a war to weaken Russia. These other wars were wars to weaken the states, Iraq and Libya and Syria. But Russia is not the same. And they haven't been successful in weakening Russia. Russia has become stronger militarily and economically. And they're not going to push Russia to the side. And they don't really believe it yet. Trump doesn't believe it. Trump thinks he can intimidate Russia. They don't really believe that they can't escalation dominate Russia, and they can't, certainly not in Ukraine.
There are two things. One, they think that they can threaten Russia, and the other element of this is they think Putin is bluffing. When you put those two elements together, you have an incredibly misled. Your logic is incredibly flawed. One, you can't threaten them, you can't intimidate them, and two, they're not bluffing. Don't mistake, and I say this on the show all the time, don't mistake restraint with fear. It's not, I can't kick your ass. It's, I'm choosing right now not to kick your ass. Don't confuse the two.
Yep. There's a great couple of lines by the Saker. I used to write about Russia a lot. The Americans are not afraid of war, but they're not ready for it. The Russians are afraid of war, and they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. Americans go around all the time threatening everybody with war, right? But they've never experienced it really. I mean, the biggest attack and of casualties on territory of the United States since the Civil War was 9/11, or Pearl Harbor, a couple of thousand casualties, right? Russia has 27 million casualties in World War II. They had foreign armies stomping all over their ground. They know what war is. They don't want it. That's right. Why they're so risk averse. Putin's family was killed in the siege of Leningrad. Siege of million people would die. They were eating each other eating animals in the street. It was one of the worst sieges in history. And so the Russian people don't want war, but they're ready for it. They know what it is. They're not kidding themselves about it. Right. It's not something that's going to happen over there. We're not going to feel like, if we're going to have war, we're going to have to fight it. And it's going to be so. And the next time there's a war with Russia, it's not just from our point of view going to happen over there. This is going to hurt. Europe is going to be hit, certainly, and probably the continental United States. And there's no reason they shouldn't. And the Americans don't believe it. They don't believe it.
To that point, that famous meeting about 2 years ago when Macron went to Moscow and met with Putin, and they're sitting at that very, very long table, and at opposite ends of this incredibly long table. And Putin says to Macron, he says, if France gets involved in Ukraine, I can send a missile into Paris. Mm-hmm. And Macron looked at Putin like somebody had pooped in his soup. He was like, oh God, no, please. You think Notre Dame being ablaze was a bad idea. There's a going back to these rebels. I really wanted to, before we get back to your piece, this is in the Wall Street Journal from the 2nd of December. Today is the 9th. 1 week ago in the Wall Street Journal, how a Syrian rebel went from an American jail to seizing Aleppo. This is in the Wall Street Journal. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani boarded a bus in Damascus in 2003, heading across the desert to Baghdad with fellow volunteers eager to repel the looming American invasion of Iraq. When he returned home in 2011, after a 5-year stint in an American-run prison camp in Iraq, it was the emissary of Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Jalani arrived in Syria with bags full of cash and a mission to take the extremist movement global. Bags full of cash.
Where did he get those?
Where did he get? From Bank of America? Citibank? I'd love to see
Venmo.
His ATM
got him
card.
Venmo'd.
I'd love to see his ATM card, because where in the hell? And so that was a week ago, and today One of the things that I find really amusing, and I use that term very loosely.
Yeah.
It'd be funny if it wasn't so pathetic.
Yep.
Is that America tells you what it's going to do. They brag, they write in the papers what they're going to do. They have think tanks like the Project for the New American Century. They publish white papers. They tell you what they're going to do. They write books about it, ally versus ally. Secretary of State Blinken, he wrote this book, Ally versus Ally, which was about the fights that were going to develop between allies over oil pipelines. They telegraph the punches. And Americans just sit back because they don't read things like Wild Turkey, Syria's Blindside by Dr. Jim Kavanaugh. Am I right, Jim?
Yeah, I'm not being published in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, exactly. Look, it's true. This is a problem. It's the biggest problem in the world. That the state of consciousness of the American people.
Mm-hmm.
That is the most dangerous thing in the world. That people are fed this crap about, just looking at the papers and at the, watching the TV. My father-in-law watches CNBC and CNN, MSNBC. And it's like, oh my God. And the New York Times is like celebrating this. Jolani, the new leader of Syria, who's joined with Baghdadi, ISIS. Baghdadi also came out of an American prison. Somehow these guys went into American prisons. They were fighting against the American invasion of Iraq. The Americans put them in prison, and somehow they came out of these prisons and started these organizations. And that the Americans never, they constantly say they're attacking, but they never really did attack. When Russia came in to Syria, the Americans, ISIS, ISIS, ISIS. Russia suddenly said, oh, look at this line of convoy of trucks going from ISIS territory, carrying oil into Turkey and getting money from Turkey. How come the Americans never noticed that? They have satellites. They didn't notice ISIS was sending oil into Turkey in 100-mile convoys of trucks. Oh, we didn't notice that. So like yesterday, the Americans said, oh, dozens of attacks in Syria. Biden got up and said, and he said it was we were attacking ISIS. So suddenly, the day that Jolani and HTS are taking over Damascus, the Americans carry out dozens of strikes supposedly for ISIS. They were strikes in support of HTS and Syrian rebels, and strikes in support of Israel's offensive to while this is going on, destroy all kinds of military facilities in Syria. So, the Americans clearly, the Americans were paying these people. The Americans were paying when they were in Idlib. The money was coming from Israel and the United States and Turkey. The Americans and Israelis were paying these people. They were supporting them. Israel had field hospitals for ISIS during the Israeli civil war. Netanyahu went and visited them, congratulated them in field hospitals, and the Israeli defense minister was interviewed on American television. Said, you have field hospitals for the jihadi rebels. Oh, that's for humanitarian purposes. So do you have field hospitals for Hezbollah? No. That's a different thing. We have a different account with Hezbollah than we do with the ISIS rebels. ISIS isn't attacking us. So that's the game. And these rebels could not exist without the financial and military support of the United States and Israel. And that's been going on since the famous war on terror. It's not a war on terror. It's a war of terror that the United States has been waging with Israel in support of the Zionist project, really.
You write, it is particularly disgusting that the wild card that played itself into the horrific hand presently being dealt in the region, and you define the region as Gaza, occupied Palestine, and Lebanon, is Turkey, a powerful country of the region that was not and could not have been forced, but chose against its own professions to secure a major win for the U.S. Israel Zionist project. Has Erdogan overplayed his hand now? I know what it looks like today, but as this moves a little further down the line, after particularly having turned his back on the agreement with Russia, the same way Minsk was flipped on Russia, has Erdogan overplayed his hand?
Well, he has a good hand. That's the problem.
Right.
He has a good hand. He has very strong economic relations with Russia and with Iran. Turkey is a major player in the region and a member of NATO. They want it in BRICS. The Chinese want it in the Belt and Road Initiative. Turkey has power and enough power that Erdogan can't be forced to do things, even by the Americans and the Israelis. And that's my point here. He was nasty about this. And the Russians, I hope they learned it. He betrayed them over the prisoners, the Azov prisoners that he took in, and said, okay, we will take, don't kill these prisoners, or don't these Nazi prisoners from Mariupol. We'll take them in and we'll keep them out of the war. And then he sent them back to send them back to Ukraine to go back into the war. And now he's betrayed the Russians on this, on Astana, and the Russians must be furious about it. But he has enough sway and enough power that they can't really, it can't really go up against him too much. But that's one thing. But your point is, everybody in here may have overplayed their hand in a sense, because as I say, it is going to be chaotic now. And look, Syria, has this other group, which is you have the jihadi, the Islamic jihadis, but then you have the Kurds, and they are the enemies of Erdogan in Turkey, but they're being supported by the United States. So famous headlines of one group of American rebels, Kurdish rebels, fighting another group of American-supported rebels, the Turkish-supported rebels. So now the Kurdish groups they're going to say, we see the breakup of the Syrian state. We're going to move against the Kurdish forces in Syria. So yes, to a certain extent, they've opened up a can of worms. They know it. They've opened up a can of worms that they don't quite know what worm is going to come out and what worm might bite them. But again, what I'm saying is that kind of chaos, there's a level of they're afraid of it, but it's not the chaos that's organized and disciplined and directed toward fighting Zionism and fighting the Zionist project and fighting for the Palestinians. And that's why I say, when I mentioned the Gaza and West Bank and Lebanon, because this is what Erdogan has been standing around saying, oh, this is terrible, we got to do something about this, and pretending he's against that. But in that particular context, he chose to come in and strengthen the hand of the United States and Israel in a way that was just disgraceful.
Just disgraceful is an understatement. You write, for Iran and Hezbollah, Syria is an existentially important ally, but they too are engaged in fighting and are taking hits on another home fronts they are loath to weaken further. Each of these allies have constituencies and commanders who will resist committing major resources that are needed closer to home. So as we look at the conflict in Lebanon, as we look at Iran, what do you think is going through the heads of leadership there now? Because this is not an ideological issue for Iran. This is not an ideological issue for Lebanon. This gets to the very core of who they are, what they're about, what their cultures have been about for thousands of years, and these issues are non-negotiable for them. Yeah. So go ahead, Jim Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, yeah, Iran is under threat, serious threat, and we say they have all this power, they have all these missiles, they have all this capability. They have not. They said they were going to strike back at Israel. They didn't do it, And again,
well, they haven't done it yet.
I know they haven't done it yet. All right, but they're afraid of nuclear war. They're afraid of the United States and Israel coming in and destroying them. And they can't, the United States and Israel can't destroy Iran in the way they did Iraq and Libya, but they can set it back 10, 20 years. They can, that's what they want. They're going to take it off the table for, make it slink back a little bit and shrink back. And I don't know. I don't know the extent to which Iran can hurt them. The problem for Israel and the United States is Iran can hurt Israel. I think that's true, but they have to be willing to do it, knowing that the United States is going to support anything Israel does and come in on its own and use any weapon it can against Iran. This is the problem. I don't blame them for not wanting to do it, but the game is on and everybody's all in. The Israelis and the Americans are saying, look, we're all in. The Israelis, they are destroying Palestine. This is a slaughter and a Holocaust. There's nobody going to be living in northern Gaza in 6 months except Israeli Jewish settlers. There's not going to be any Palestinian Arabs in northern Gaza in 6 months, 6 months to a year. And after a year after that, all of Gaza, they'll be gone. And Hamas can't stop it. Hamas can fight Israel and kill soldiers, but are they stopping Israel from depopulating northern Gaza and exterminating people every day? No, they can't. And so either someone's going to come in, and this is not going to stop until Israel has to slink back into its hole because its home territory is being hurt, and it can't. It's got to try and defend it in some other way. It's got to be put on the defensive. So Iran has to decide about that. Russia has to. What's the military agreement between Iran and Russia? That we hear about it. What's the real content of it? Does that mean Russia is going to come in to support Iran the way the Americans support Israel? So, and
before I get Kareem, well, let me ask Kareem's question. Then I'm gonna get back to this point. Will there be pushback from the Turkish population for Erdogan's actions?
I don't know the answer. I don't know enough about Turkey to know the answer to that. It's a very good question because exactly right. Erdogan does what he does, not only because Turkey is a very powerful country and very, in a corner of the world that you can't ignore. It controls the Dardanelles. It's keeping the American warships out of the Black Sea for Russia during this Ukraine war. So Turkey is a powerful country, but Erdogan obviously has a lot of power in Turkey. Does he have a domestic opposition that's on this issue? I have to believe that there's a section of the Turkish population that doesn't like the fact that he's doing this because they know it's supporting Israel, and he himself has to publicly be and pretend he's anti-Zionist and pretend he's not supporting Israel. But I suspect that he has enough support and secure enough support that there's not the political movement in the country that's going to stop him on this issue. Just like in the United States, unfortunately. Same kind of question.
Let me throw this into the analysis, and I think the proper pronunciation of the name is Kareem. Kareem, I hope I got it right this time. I don't know. So I say to my students all the time, you always have to differentiate between the theoretical and the practical. That a lot of things that sound good as it relates to policy, a lot of things that sound good or look good on paper may not necessarily play themselves out the way you plan when you try to practically apply them. So I would wonder, Jim Kavanaugh, theoretically, to Kareem's question, there are probably a lot of Turkish people that are angry as hell at Erdogan. But I had it right the first time. It's Kareem. Okay, thank you. No disrespect, Kareem. But the only way those forces in Turkey will come to the forefront is if they start to feel pain from the actions that Erdogan has taken. If missiles start flying into Turkey, if for whatever reason the Turkish economy starts to feel even more pain then the forces will come to, because there are now practical realities that are playing themselves out in the everyday lives of the Turkish citizenry.
It's exactly, it's like the United States, you know.
Mhm.
It's like the United States. Unfortunately, we have a citizenry that, you know, is trapped in a kind of idea, thinking that, you know, we've got to find somewhere between Democrats and Republicans and billionaire populism and whatever. But we're not really feeling threatened by these things. So we take that most people don't feel they're of existential interest to them, and so whatever dissonance there is however, and however widespread it is. I mean, look, we're talking about the assassination of the United CEO. Obviously, there's widespread feeling about healthcare in this country, but it doesn't get into the political realm. It's not pushed into the political realm enough. Everybody who's so pissed off about healthcare, somehow that anger doesn't get in the political realm in the way that anger about other things gets in the political realm. You know, so this is part of the problem. I think it's similar in Turkey, and the Turkish people and the American people have to figure out for themselves what they're going to do with their leaders. So I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not very sanguine about that. I'm not very happy about it. I'm not very hopeful about it.
Mile High Brother asks, and another good question: do you agree that Russia, China, and Iran showing restraint against the genocidal West has proven to be a flawed strategy? Let me give you my answer, and then Jim, you can give yours. I think the answer to that question is similar to Mao's answer about the French Revolution. I think Mao was asked sometime in like 1964, 1965, whether he thought the French Revolution was a success. He says it's too early to tell. So I don't know the answer whether the restraint was a flawed strategy. I think it's too early to tell. But in your calculus of this, I think you have to remember that these are forces of resistance that are fighting a different fight than, say, the United States and Russia. So smaller entities, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, they have coalesced, and they have to fight a different type strategy because they can't win the head-to-head competition. They know that. So they have to win by death by 1,000 cuts. And what we don't know is, are we in cut 10? Are we in cut 200? Are we in cut 800? I think it's too early to tell. And because Russia has demonstrated with the missile that it used, that hypersonic missile that it used in Ukraine, they got a whole lot in their arsenal that we don't have. Iran has demonstrated with its drone strikes targeting military targets and not targeting civilian targets. They have demonstrated Iron Dome doesn't work. They can strike when they want to, and they can hit their targets. The question is, and I don't know the answer to this, what's their long-term strategy? What's their long-term game? Jim Kavanaugh.
Well, yeah, I'll say Mile High, yes, it is flawed. Their strategy is flawed because they're not doing what I want them to do, what everybody in the world knows they should do.
Kick somebody's ass.
Yeah, no, but it's certainly in relationship to the genocide that's happening in Gaza. You know, that in particular is something I think there was something that this required. You know, again, Hamas is fighting, Hezbollah is fighting, they're fighting hard and they're fighting well, but they can't stop it. And it requires major political actor, military political force to come in and say, we're going to stop this. Okay. And I think, you know, after a month of this, after 2 months of this, watching what was happening, children being slaughtered, hospitals being destroyed, blown up, every educational institution, professors and doctors and journalists being targeted at home with their children, with their families deliberately. I think at a certain point, before over a year has gone by, international forces, but the problem, I was always saying Russia, China, has to be someone that's capable of, has the military. It can't be, Yemen is not going to be able to do that themselves, but it has to be someone with a military force enough to say, we are coming into Gaza with humanitarian aid. We're not coming here to fight Israel. We're not coming here to overthrow Zionism. We're coming here with humanitarian aid and reconstruction aid for the people of Gaza to put this to end. And we're coming in military escort. You want to fight us? Fight us over that. Challenge the Americans and Israelis to fight you militarily to prevent you from stopping the slaughter in Gaza. I think that could have happened. Especially could have happened if Turkey had been part of it, because that's a regional player. It's another thing when there's players from outside the region entirely. They should be doing, somebody should be doing something different. But again, we're still in a world of nation states, and they have their own problems. And China's going to, it's terrible to say, but who has enough interest in the Palestinian, in saving the Palestinian people from being slaughtered, as to risk a conflict, direct conflict with Israel and the United States? They will fight. You have to be not bluffing about it. You have to do it. Here we are. We're landing in Gaza. You want to fight us? Fight us. We have our military with us. Fight us. We're not going to fight you if you just let us deliver humanitarian aid and reconstruction aid. But you've got to be willing to go to battle for that. So what country, it's like, what countries in the world nobody went to war with Hitler in order to save the Jews. They didn't. They went to war for their own reasons. You know what I mean? And not just the Jews, but the other people who were the
gypsies and a whole lot of people,
the communists, etc. Nobody went to war in order to save the people in the concentration camps. So they went for their own reasons. And I can understand 100% why any country in the world would say, are we going to put our country into a war with the United States and the United States? Because that's really at the end of what it is, potentially a nuclear war. And Israel will use your nuclear weapons whenever it wants. So it's a real consideration. I feel horrible about it myself. I can't do anything, but I feel horrible about it. And I think those countries have to be asked, is there nothing else you could have done? Really?
Unemployed scholar, and thank you for that $10 super sticker. Thank you very much. Honestly, I wonder if the Middle East borders, which are just the result of colonial powers from drawing lines in the region anyway, should fall, which would unite them against the Zionist entity. Well, the improperly drawn borders, the falsely drawn borders, has been a problem in the region since the borders were drawn. How they fall now, what the results of that would be, I don't know. Jim Kavanaugh.
Well, it's not just the borders that disunite people and that divide them. This is, and if you see the Arabs online now in the last couple of days, why can't we unite? Why are we divided, Sunni and Shia? It's the Gulf monarchies versus the secular socialist Ba'athist states. That was really Baathism was the kind of socialist ideology of the Ba'ath party in Iraq and Syria, and they put an end to that. That was the the Gulf monarchies didn't like this kind of secular quasi-socialist states that were in those regions. So they're glad to see that go for that reason. Okay. So there were all kinds of, and the Americans just very shrewdly, this is classic colonialism, divide and conquer according to use the divisions in the indigenous peoples to divide them up. And they've done that with the Sunni and Shia and with the monarchies versus the socialist republics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, the Arab world, and Egypt has been terrible about. Egypt could have been was the center of it for some time, but the Arab world has been divided, and that's not just The United States and the Israeli and the Zionist movement use that division, but the Arab and Muslim world has to deal with that. And also, they have the responsibility to overcome division. Look, I was thinking this morning, it's like cultural issues for us, or identity politics issues, that divide us. Okay, the OG identity politics issue is religion, is religious divisions, right? And the Americans and the Zionists have used fundamental religious divisions to keep people divided from uniting against them and against Zionism. And identity politics and cultural politics is used here to keep people divided from fighting the ruling class. So in a certain sense, that's part of the problematic of those cultures and the history of those countries. And the United States has been very adept at using it against them. And a lot of work has to be done on that all around, from within and from without.
What do you want? What are the three major points that you want a reader to take away from your incredibly well done piece, Wild Turkey, Syria's Blindside, which is at Substack and The Polemicist? Wild Turkey, Syria's Blindside. What are the three major points you want the reader to take away from your piece when they're done with it?
It's one big war. all these various things that are going on, Ukraine, Palestine, Syria, it's one big war. Number two, very important, probably number one for me, you can't be anti-imperialist without being anti-Zionist, okay? And all these countries, Russia, China, they want to say, oh, and I understand, they don't really want to get into it. But guess what? The Americans are into it. The American imperialism considers itself a Zionist project. And you are going to run into that, whether you like it or not. You can't be anti-war and you can't be anti-imperialist without being anti-Zionist. You're going to go to war. Zionism is going to get you into war. It is as you into war. Number three, nothing's inevitable. We've got to be have a little humility. We see the dynamic that's going on. We're we get a triumphalist about how powerful Russia is, and they're going to win here and they're going to win there, and how China can't be beaten. They can't. But punches come out of the blue, sucker punches. Look at what happened with Turkey, and things are going to happen that are going to disrupt in a major way any kind of progress we think we see happening in the world. So those are the three things. One, no such thing as anti-imperialism without anti-Zionism. Two, it's one big war. Three, nothing is inevitable, and we have to have a little humility about what we think is inevitable.
And to your one big war point, looking ahead, what frameworks or alliances could emerge to counterbalance rising nuclear threats and ensure global stability? And the rising nuclear threats. So when you talk about one big war, as we see Russia lowering its nuclear threshold, as the United States seems to not to care about that, your thoughts?
Yeah, I said many months ago, last year, I wrote an article about there's at least a 50-50 chance of nuclear war over Ukraine. I still think that's true. But I also said, I think the first place that nuclear war is going to happen is Iran. The three theaters where nuclear war is possible, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, and China. I think the first place, temporarily speaking, it's likely to happen is Iran. But
wait, and in Iran, that would be Israel using a nuclear weapon as a first strike weapon against Iran. Because Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons.
If there's an all-out attack, Israel and the United States against Iran, Israel will use nuclear weapons. They know Iran is strong. They know it's getting stronger, and they're not going to take the chance of going into an all-out attack on Iran without using all the weapons they can to make the point, not just the point, but the reality to Iran, we're setting you back at least 10 or 15 years. Israel's not going to do it for a bloody nose. Right. They're going to do it to set Iran back 10 or 20 years. So that's the only thing they can do it with.
Is that a Faustian bargain? Is that a deal where where Israel is willing to trade taking the huge hit that they would take if they did that in terms of incoming missiles from Iran for this material benefit of setting Iran back.
Well, my point is that if they go into a war with Iran, they're going to take a hit of incoming missiles anyway. Okay, that's my point. Is they're not going to go into a full-on war with Iran. They know they're going to get hit. They're not stupid. They know that Iran. I can't believe Iran won't, if there's a full-on war, full-on attack Israel. Okay, that's why Israel will use nuclear weapons, because they can't win otherwise, in a certain sense. You know what I mean? And they may not even with that, but Iran is a tough country. But so that's why they'll win. That's why they'll use nuclear weapons. Now, in Ukraine, I say again, Donald Trump can't just say, "Oh, I give up." Right. It's the end of NATO.
Right.
You know, and Russia is essentially telling Donald Trump and the Americans, that's the game. That's the situation you're in. We've won. We're going to get everything we wanted. We're not going to stop until we do. So if people think, Russians think, if the Iranians think, Donald Trump's going to come in and say, well, I'll figure out some way and make it, I can find a way to make it look like I didn't give up. No, you can't in Ukraine.
Right. And that's the objective.
It's an unavoidable loss.
And that's the objective, is the West is trying to figure out a way to claim victory from an ass whooping.
Yeah.
Because Russia, that right now, as I interpret what Russia is saying, no, it's complete unilateral surrender. We've already beaten you. We're not returning property. We're not giving up land. You will not join NATO. You will not put weapons facing our country in your what's left of your territory, and the Nazis got to go. That's been the consistent message from day one. That hasn't changed, even though the MSNBCs and the CNNs, even though they don't want to tell you that. That's been the consistent message all along. So to think that they can come in and broker some deal, the deal is fire up the USS Missouri, send it into the Black Sea, resurrect Emperor Hirohito, and get that damn thing signed. Take us out, Jim.
Well, yeah, we are in a very dangerous situation. As you say, in Ukraine, I don't think the Americans are losing and have lost. And will they accept the loss, or will they use every weapon they have to try and reverse it? And I'm not betting against the latter. So this is the world we're in now. You know, we have the Israelis and the Americans rampaging throughout the Middle East, a genocide, a Holocaust in Gaza that isn't going to stop. Israel is blowing up Lebanon, Beirut. They're bombing Beirut, the middle apartment complexes in Lebanon, you know, and they won't stop until, well, they got the ceasefire, and we'll see I don't know where this is going to go. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. We've just seen, as I say, surprise, surprise. We got a punch out of left field. A sucker punch we weren't expecting, and a sucker punch could come for the Israelis and the Americans. And I got to see what Iran does. Iran has a lot of responsibility on its shoulder, and I don't know. We're in a very dangerous time. It's getting more dangerous. Donald Trump isn't going to make it any easier. And the American people, have to start thinking differently.
Dr. Jim Kavanaugh, thank you. Thank you so much for getting up early. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated. And let me say to the audience again, the piece is Wild Turkey, Syria's Blindside. You can find it at Substack. It's a phenomenal. And Jim, this is very simple, but one of the things that I really like about the piece is you have a map at the top of it. And because I say all the time that for folks to really understand the dynamics of what's involved here, you got to look at the map, because the geopolitics of this is what is controlling the politics of this. So as well as the economic politics as well. But so the map helped me. It always helps me to be able to look at the map and say, oh, well, this is where Syria is. This is where Aleppo is. This is where. So Great piece, Dr. Jim Kavanaugh. Really appreciate it. Get some coffee, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Hey, folks, we had to get up early this morning. I've got some stuff I've got to get done today, and we did not want the day to pass without us having this conversation. So stay tuned tomorrow. I'm working on, let me see if I got an answer yet. We're going to stay focused on Syria for a couple of days because this stuff is still unraveling. Laith Marouf might join us tomorrow. Still working on that. Dr. Radhika Desai might join us tomorrow. Still trying to work through that. But stay tuned because there will be another brilliant mind like Dr. Jim Kavanaugh's joining us tomorrow to talk about this issue. Thank you for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Please follow and subscribe. Leave a review. Share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links to the show below in the show description. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you tomorrow. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.